we'll make a start. Yes, first of all, I'd just like to start by saying hello and welcome to everyone here for this event, a conversation with the artist, Jan Valik. And a special thank you to anyone who has come to any of our prior events. Indeed, we had the artist talk with Abigail Lentz, and more recently our panel. Now, yes, tonight, as I said, I'm pleased to say we're joined by the artist himself, whose three of his works feature very prominently in the exhibition, those being It's About Time and Fragile Veils 1 and 2, the triptych. Thank you, yes. And so in addition to just, a few images of, as it were, the exhibition itself and an overview of Miss Valik's pieces in that exhibition. We'll start just by going through. This was the piece of writing the essay that accompanied these works within our catalogue. I'll just read that through very quickly, if I may. Just as a quick rundown overview, and I'm very curious to see what Mr. Valik has to say about my interpretation of his work, certainly. So Jan Valik is a London-based painter, graduate of the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague, in the Czech Republic. Valik's pieces are produced without any preliminary sketches. This allows him to draw from the stream of consciousness and more directly place an immediate psychological impact upon the landscapes he produces. Valik's triptych plays with the interaction between real and abstract space. The ethereal veils in It's About Time yield to a rugged pathway which permits the viewer a tangible point from which to explore the space. The contrast between these elements creates an impression of carving out an immaterial and internal space. The ceiling-like structure in Fragile Veils directly contrasts with the void depicted in Fragile Veils 2. Despite this, both pieces are used in order to reinforce the cavernous impression of the triptych. Through his attention to depth, Valik creates a piece that is simultaneously revealing and mysterious. One may perceive Valik's use of fabrics as a tangible depiction of a mental blockade, stress or distractions that must be carved away before this inner space can be cultivated and explored. The gaze of the viewer is halted as a result of these veils' collective opacity, again reflecting the accumulation of mental baggage that may prevent us from partaking in the introspection necessary to carve out this internal space. There is almost a sense of catharsis to be found in this triptych, a visualization of these previously intangible blockades which we're able to work towards overcoming. Indeed, if I may, I'm curious to know your particular thoughts on that interpretation, because I appreciate that it's within the confines of this idea of the inner garden, the inner space.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for that I can be part of this exhibition, and yeah, I appreciate it. I think just straight away, you read the painting and its intention and its creations almost perfectly. Like everything you said kind of matters to me also in the course of creation, as well as these pieces themselves, and they are just a little bit more figurative than I usually do, and I think this is also interesting for me because they are essentially connected very closely to what this exhibition is about, about this sort of metaphorical gardens of dreams and something which is at the same time present and absent as well. So it has a lot to do with possibilities of imagination, and as well as sort of reflection on possibly landscape and space, and one's finally one's own existence, probably. Yeah, so I really think you nailed it with with the text. Like yeah, I have no objections almost. Yeah.
I'm very flattered to hear you say that, certainly. And indeed, no, thank you very much for being both willing to participate in the exhibition itself and to speak to us today. It's been, an absolute joy all the way through, I must admit. The way we're sort of looking to do things is we have a few questions of our own that we've sort of worked out that we'd just like to pose to you. And then we'd sort of aiming to finish off with a bit of Q&A just to be thrown out to the audience. So indeed, if anybody anybody in attendance does have any sort of questions that pop up throughout, don't hesitate to put them in the chat and we'll go through those towards the end. Or, at any point, don't hesitate to throw those in. But if I may, I'll make a start. Could you describe, as it were, the process behind creating sort of these works? The idea of sort of how long did they sort of take to produce, first of all?
Yeah. Generally, I tend to think it varies. Like it takes. I don't have a static rhythm by which I can accomplish work. Sometimes it takes. Actually, sometimes the time when I'm not working on them on some particular pieces is as important as working on them, because since, as you read as well, since I don't work, I don't upscale from sketches. I don't do so, if I may say, I don't rehearse the painting, because it's for me it's very important to keep the process of creation alive, and I tend to respond it as a I tend to respond to different layers and to brush strokes and so back to your question, but these pieces actually, they were, I'm sure, I'm very aware that they are linked to these lockdown times actually, because upon my return to the UK, I was of course quarantined myself, and I actually in my room I started to be aware of looking at the drapes on curtains and kind of very, very much being aware of looking from the room towards the outside, almost not being able to taking my part in society. So actually I start to sketch them. I start to draw just very, very freely as a kind of excuse to explore a different kind of space which I was confronted with, and everybody is, I guess. And by very coincidence, I also I looked at watercolor of Eugène Delacroix, an unmade bed, actually made around 200 years ago, and it's something struck me as a very great topic to kind of develop. So when I was able to come back to the studio, I sort of started to play with the idea and kind of developed it into a couple of paintings.
Yeah, in sort of addition to that, I'm curious to know, as you said, you don't have a sort of there's no set rhythm to their sort of production. Do you lean towards producing sort of multiple works simultaneously, or do you devote your attention to sort of one or two at a time?
Yeah, I find it very difficult to work on one painting, because so I have to naturally I try to I spread my ideas on different canvases, and even they might at the beginning start to look, or I apply similar colors in the course of the process, they start to differ quite immensely differ, and then so I use multiple canvases at the same time, also on different scales.
So judging from that, then we can sort of assume that there wasn't necessarily a gap in the production of this, these three works, and that it was whether or not intended, it was produced as a triptych sort of from the start.
Yeah, we can say so. I can say so, but I didn't. Still, there's there's this bit that I don't decide before. I kind of go along, and yes, it ended up more or less like triptych. But I think I need to kind of take the idea from inside of the work. So otherwise, if I decide beforehand too strictly, I get to be bored with myself with the decision. So I break it eventually in the middle of it. So
no,
yeah.
I think that's quite interesting. It's sort of, in a way, less so that you decided to, or it turned out a triptych, as it were. It decided that it was a triptych. Would that be more of an appropriate?
I think so. Yeah.
Definitely.
I find it so interesting how your works are kind of a snapshot of your present moment, and how this use of not sketching almost makes them even more present in how you're feeling, into your subconscious thoughts, and then closer relates it to the inner garden, which is the concept we're working with for the exhibition. But I just wondered, what do you see when you look at the works in particular that we're exhibiting?
You mean other artists' work as well?
Your work. So it's
my
about
work.
time, Fragile Bells, and Fragile Bells too.
What do I see when I look at them, right? Yeah. So the thing is, going back to my creative process, in order to keep the work alive for me in the creative process itself, I need to feed up myself with small sort of, not really narrative, but a little bit story behind it. So I need to sort of, so for example, one trigger, as I mentioned, was coincidentally seeing this watercolor by Eugène Delacroix that helped me to shape my thought. And then I kept just looking in the, at different, for example, on the way from the studio back to my home, at different windows, how people kind of conceal, or how people keep the curtains away, or what are the reasons actually. What are the reasons for people to kind of close them? Of course, one would be privacy. Another one might be blocking the sunlight, and many other. And also, so even without sketching, I still try to kind of feed the idea of the for the painting. I need a reason for them to exist. So when I look at them now in the context of the exhibition, I think they are. I'm first of all, I'm already slightly away from it. I mean, I'm not anymore in this creative process. So I honestly don't really know how to answer the question, because I see them as a work which is sort of done, and I'm interested in next one, in sort of yeah.
I guess it's so interesting how whoever looks at this piece will see something different, because it's so open to interpretation.
That's another aspect which is very important for me to like. My work is not a biographical statement. It's not about me. Essentially, I want to keep it as open as possible, but also not empty in a way. So of course, I'm interested in my painting to be a vehicle for somebody else to come with their own story and try to read something else, or essentially, I think that's the language which I'm very interested in painting.
Yeah, so that people can almost project what they're feeling and their experiences onto it as well. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Did they turn out as you'd imagined? I know you said that you didn't have a strict plan, but I didn't know if there was any challenges or surprises that came
out. I mean, in the early stages, I always try to be very open and try to almost anything can enter my work, but so I play with chance as well. But as the time goes, it's also more clear for me where I'm heading, where the work is sort of it's not only me shaping the work, it also works kind of, it's sort of dialogue. It's a dialogue. And when I feel that it's a lot about intuition, actually. So finally I try to articulate something, and at that time, I apply more control over the layers. I'm more aware and more conscious about the certain decisions. And of course, I think about composition at that stage and kind of bring the different parts. I look at it on if it works visually, if it works also in alignment of my thoughts and the process. So sort of there are quite like vague principles, but very important for me.
You can certainly see how it reflects in the work, definitely. And one thing I was sort of interested in is this sort of idea of that you perceive your painting as a vessel through which to, or yourself as a vessel through which to create the painting, as opposed to something more biographical, more as it were, pouring some of yourself into it. That's not to say that your ideals and your input isn't present there, because it certainly is. But would you say that it's, rather than trying to make something analogous to something else, to have a sort of clear set idea behind it, you're trying to make something that's applicable to whatever it is that the viewer is trying to sort of take away from it or interpret it as? It's sort of, in a way, it's, rather than trying to provide a set meaning, it's providing a space on which to apply that meaning.
Yeah. So for me, it's also a journey of discovery, the painting itself. But at the same time, I don't want to keep it. It's not about everything and nothing, So the reason for painting to exist is actually that it has some particular position which probably there is at the moment no other media I can imagine it in. So, for example, if I'm too much, if I think that it's too much about something, then I'm not sure. Maybe photography would be better, Maybe poetry, maybe novel. If it's too much in the language, in that sort of like in a sort of like linguistic. So essentially, it's a journey of discovering. So.
So no, I get where you're coming from, and I will say I think it's really interesting the way that you mentioned about splitting your ideas across canvases. This idea of sprawling out, because I feel like a lot of people might be so inclined to, as an idea grows, to layer it and layer it, and then whatever sort of meaning or whatever narrative, because you've said that even then narrative plays some small part in, or some aspect of your painting. When that narrative gets too large, I imagine that's when it starts to move out, almost spread out across multiple works, rather than trying to confine it to one.
Yeah, I think, well, every one of us carries their own narrative, and regardless of how much we try to distance ourselves, we still have the narrative, and it's so human thing to do. So I think I don't need to kind of illustrate the narrative in it. So it plays a subtle role there, and I don't want to end up like illustrating it. So therefore I need, there are painterly wise, there are always possibilities how to kind of pull it back. So I might go more abstract, or actually discard the idea if I feel, and then I might feel that it's going well, and next morning in the studio I feel like, oh my God, it's really well, no, I have to kind of fight it a bit more, or come up with another idea, and not always this idea has to be applied on the same canvas. So it's always, I always feel great. It always feels great to start a new canvas, because there is this openness, there is this simply vast space of possibilities. But once you are narrowing it down, it starts to be a little bit more difficult difficult to work on it constantly. So actually it takes time to just sit down and work on another painting. And yeah, and often the solution for the one which is sitting the work is actually coming from the one freshly started. So I think there is a flowing link, and actually this is also the story of this triptych. So actually they back and forth influence each other. But as I already explained, they were not from the beginning meant to be as a triptych, but kind of evolved into one.
So I'm just out of curiosity, It's About Time that began, and then of course it moved on to Fragile Vales 1 and then 2.
Right.
I appreciate, as you've said, that they there was no intention to make a triptych of them. It's just what sort of occurred. I'm curious to ask, is there any importance placed upon the size, or at least the size difference, as it were, between the three works? Because It's About Time is so much substantially larger. Is it perhaps, or is there any sort of cross between or link between the sort of size, as it were, of the tangent's not the right word, but the idea or the additional whatever it is that you're trying to move onto a different surface?
Yeah.
Is that what influences the size of a new piece?
I mean, I'm very much aware of the size of the canvas in relation to human body. So, and always when I look at, for example, very like years back, I thought about canvases, how to actually decide the size of the canvas. Probably back in my studies in Prague, I actually measured my window in my room and kind of make it as a concept for making a couple of works, because essentially I had there is something against subtle narrative about it, but it's a kind of excuse to solve this puzzle, how to decide the size of the canvas. So regarding these works, I think, well, the big one is About Time, and definitely needed kind of this human scale, and these drapes almost as a door, or they are actually, it's not huge painting, but definitely in order to be a little bit more immersive for the viewer. I think this scale is about that, like creating this sort of space for immersion. And the smaller ones, like these middle-sized canvases are always, and almost every painter would know this struggle with middle-sized canvases, because they are almost unforgivable. They are not unforgiving. Yeah, right. Thanks. So but still there is, because I think it's also partly because the gesture of when you are in front of canvas simply has to be more reduced or composed, and I think they demand different effort even from the viewer, because they feel a little bit more vulnerable. I mean, just because humans are usually how we are, so these are like much smaller windows, but at the same time it might be turned into their power, because we are so well accustomed with the sizes of windows as a like framework of the windows is so kind of important. So it's linked to this, still is linked to the human body, and what is the relation of of the one looking through the window, or actually through the door, or whatever framework it is.
I wondered, was there a reason that you chose to work on linen instead of the traditional canvas?
When I work occasionally on linen, occasionally I do, I do also priming myself. So this one, the case of the big one, it's, I also did the gesso myself and everything. So it's a little bit more rough linen, and the other ones are on yeah, canvas. So I often I change it. I don't have only one canvas. I have like more, even in linen, I have more rough and more finer, and it changes the brushwork. It changes something in the work. You have to kind of, it's a little bit like changing tone in a dialogue with a canvas. So all the materials are important, and the supports, like this linen, gives kind of different, slightly changes the vocabulary, actually, I would say, or you have to find a way how to move around it. Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting. You know, it's certainly good to have, you know, as it were, that sort of variation. I think. Do you think some of that sort of shift in tone is in part perhaps textural? Would you say?
I think so in some way, and also like I love to work on linen, but also it's also on canvas. Essentially, I can't decide which way to go, so I keep just changing different supports, but they are not like immensely different. They are still sort of
Yeah,
classical, both of them.
certainly.
It's, yeah, there is, again, there is no clear key why I decide, or actually I'm not aware of why I decide if it's linen or canvas. There is only sort of like intuitive level to it. Once I'm too much kind of once I'm too much I might say even I might be like a little bit bored with linen, and then I switch back to canvas and again.
No, it seems definitely there's like a I think it's quite nice that there's sort of some oscillation there. It sort of fits the, as you've described it, the flow of your work, moving back and forth between different sort of things. And yeah, no, I can certainly see
I think
the presence of that.
yeah, it's, I think I essentially I enjoy this instability of elements. So as I said, even though they are not like, I'm not still within sort of fine art materials, you know, but even there, it's, I like to change the possibilities with, and sometimes that's just enough to change the work.
It helps prevent sort of stagnation, doesn't it, to some extent?
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of yes, that idea of growing bored with one thing and being able to switch.
Or even if I try to decide if I like, all right, from now on I do only canvas because it's, I don't know for what reason, then I kind of, I don't believe my decision. Basically, I break it in 2 weeks. So.
Yeah. I'm curious to ask as well. Actually, this is just again another bit of a sort of technical side of things, but as I said, you know, you make use of a lot of very thin layering to try and well, it's to create that transparency, or that sort of semi-transparency in that work. And is there? I appreciate that every work is very different, but I'm curious to know if you have sort of a rough guess as to how many layers went into a piece like It's About Time or one of the fragile vehicles.
I think, first of all, translucency and this transparency of color is very important visually as well as metaphorically. And in some way, I like the audience or the visitor to still feel that it's he or she, they can almost like go back in the layers. So it's an additional space. The space is not built only with perspective or shadows. It's also psychological space of layering. So I like to imagine that they might count themselves. I would say roughly about 7 to 10 layers. Yeah.
So would you say that the use of the oil paint allows you to then thin this down and create more transparent layers?
Oil paint with, especially the transparent ones, or when I apply some medium which helps the fluidity of the brushwork, and so it helps also not work to be overly expressive in a sort of abstract expressionist terms where it was almost never transparent, Yeah. So it kind of smoothes the gesture as well and helps to build layers. And this is also something which oil paints are excellent in. So yeah.
Working with a medium like that, I mean, you can thin it down to such a fine wash almost.
Even to use it almost as a watercolor. Yeah,
which again plays in quite nicely to this.
And I'm always fascinated with sort of immateriality of the material, as well as still, even how much immaterial we would like to be, it still has to be played within the material. So I like this sort of mind game actually, which may happen there.
Yeah, and just to sort of springboard off what you'd said about the idea of the viewer sort of being able to almost recede back into that space, and sort of what you were saying, previously about this, you're experiencing quarantine, having just come back to the UK, and sort of this work being, or It's About Time especially, being something that you can, off the back of your what you'd said, you could interpret it now almost as that sort of want to be outside, or my previous interpretation of it was going, as it were, deeper into this sort of space. And this is going to be a bit of a weird phrasing here, but are these sort of internal, this sort of mental or sort of internalized space, is there a tangible link to our surroundings, our external? Do you see a link between sort of these two?
Absolutely. I think the link is constantly present. I think there is, like, subconsciously, and then also just consciously, it's I think it's the psychology of human perception. It's outside. It's not possible to just locate inside or outside. I think the edge of because depends on each own psychology. That's how we perceive the world. That's how the experience. There's a filter through which the experiences are interpreted or actually remembered or recollected. And also memory is a shifting place. It's never stable. So I think I'm very interested in this edge of perception where outside and it simultaneously means inside, and actually there is no inside and outside. And also, well, it tends to be more philosophical, but yeah, I think that's really how we perceive the world, or essentially.
No, I think it's, especially pertinent, seeing as, over the last year and so long, we've all been very much in a way subjected to our immediate environment. I think that sort of hearing your your interpretation of It's About Time, that idea of, wanting that escape or that sort of release, I think is something that is very much so understandable, or we can, to some greater or lesser extent, sort of relate to, definitely. I will actually draw sort of reference to, there was a piece of work that we had initially contacted you regarding. It was Untouched World, I believe. Yes. And that piece, that was made in 2020, wasn't it?
I think so. At the end of 2020, yeah, it might possibly.
And it's this sort of is in part in relation to your both this sort of interpretation of, yes, thank you, the effect of the sort of the environment, but also as it were the technical side of things. But when we were looking through this as a group, and we put forward our request to borrow this work, it's definitely in a way, although both this and It's About Time and the other pieces, they all have a sense of the dynamic to them. There's something, although still quite calm, it feels like there's a bit more sort of turbulence to it by comparison to the other sort of work. And is there a particular way almost that you would go about making something more, how to describe, but that more dynamic, more sort of to have a greater range of motion in a piece?
Well,
I do apologize for the long-winded nature of the question.
No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, this work is much more a landscape in itself, but keeping in mind that landscape is not, again, it's a very cultural term. Actually, it's always constructed, and there are many sort of artificial decisions, even in painting realistic landscape. So. Sorry again, what was the question?
No, I'm actually going to just quickly sort of hop off what you said there. Would you say that actually it seems to be just in comparison, or just looking at those works, both this and sort of It's About Time, there's a lot of focus placed on sort of, as it were, the upper 2/3 almost of the canvas, and it seems to be that in this instance, it's more of a skyscape than a landscape.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, this one is much more about opens, or sort of like escaping to somewhere unspecific, more a little bit like dream space or something. Well, and if you look at this one, it's almost all colors are not naturally based. I mean, there is literally no green and nothing which, so it sort of shows you or pushes you towards an imaginative space, probably. And also you might notice many frames, like painted frames, which are, as we spoke about layers, this is another possibility how to actually show the painting slightly being aware of itself being painted. Actually, that it's not something representational. It's sort of it itself, So there is a kind of play of, first on the one hand, this dreamscape or something which is hinting towards landscape, and on the other hand, some very abstract decisions of framing the many frames and framing the experience, and kind of playing with transparency again. And you might see a link between this work, for example, between this one and what is being shown in the gallery. You might already perceive some sort of veiling principle even in this one. and the one in the exhibition are more, a little bit, yeah, a couple of more steps into sort of interior space, into more sort of, yeah, this psychology of perception. Yeah, and also veils and fabrics and curtains are even much more art historical materials, and referencing to, might reference to so many, even towards the portraiture, like for example the traditional British portraiture, but without the figure. So it's a slightly, it's also a decorative element in the history of painting. So there are couple of different steps taken from this work, but at the same time, I would say that without having an experience of painting this one, the other ones would not be as they are.
Excellent. Yes, I see what you mean. There's definitely a clear sort of progression, especially with the context of having seen your other works as well. With this, I will say, as we're moving into sort of the last quarter of the event, this would be a great moment to open things up to the audience, and any questions, either feel free to raise a hand or to just throw that question into the chat. Either is perfectly fine, and we'll go through there if that's okay. Yes, Jörg, I see you have a hand up immediately. By all means, please.
I don't know. I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Jan. I really enjoyed listening to you, and of course before the paintings. And I don't really have a question. Sort of, I basically just want to share my impression of the paintings and what I think makes them intriguing. Yeah, and I think in part it is because it sort of the painting is about a relationship rather than a topic. Yeah, so you have this sort of the veil as something that could cover something up, but it's also something that, like, something you want to cover up and something that keeps you from seeing something you want to see. So it sort of has this ambivalent relationship between wanting to cover up and wanting to uncover. And it's also, the veil is sort of blocking, but it's also translucent. So it's like you have all of these ambivalent relationships. So they're so fragile. They're all in the way, layer after layer, but on the other hand, they're so fragile that they could be blown away immediately. So so I think for me, like, I don't know, I was just wondering what makes this image so capturing. Yeah, the paintings you made so capturing. And it's, I think, because that kind of relationship is full of tension internally. And it's sort of, I think that's also why the title, I was wondering about the title, it's about time. Yeah. So it feels like it's in a way a very well-known, but also very fragile constellation. So at any time, the situation could be radically transformed. And I think, so I just wanted to ask you, probably, if it's sort of to bend it backwards to a question. I think, is the painting about this distinct kind of relationship that of ambivalence and fragility, and therefore, because we have this relationship, so like we have this phenomenon of ambivalence and fragility in so many aspects of life, from politics to ideology to psychological inner life, and that it sort of immediately speaks to you in terms of you see in it because you're familiar with the relationship. Sort of, is that a completely wrong way of reading the work? So it's in a way an abstract work, even though it's sort of because it's sort of a painting of a distinct kind of relationship, rather than sort of a figurative painting of whales, even though it's also that. So
I think your reading of painting is really spot on. Yeah, these are totally, all of these thoughts are totally something which I had in mind. And I think also such a thing as a curtain, or just translucent curtain, it gives you the possibility of showing actually the movement, you know, like this subtle breeze or something, like how to portray actually emptiness. This is, I think, the huge and large question for painting. And you always need to do something in order to kind of let something which is not there be there. So also these curtains are about possibilities of actually such a small, in real life, such a small gesture is enough to see what's behind. But at the same time, the impossibility of doing it is also the same psychologically difficult thing I think we all are going through. And yeah, as you said, either in a small scale, like on a personal level, like creating relationships to somebody, to different people, or we still are more or less among invisible layers of sometimes it might be illusion, but they are still present. So I think from personal level up to the political, and yeah, it's something which is actually shaping painter's mind, I think, in the solitude of the studio. So it's always somewhere in the air. Yeah, it's not. But at the same time, it's not the primary focus of the work. Is not to give a biographical or political statement, but sort of going beyond these languages and trying to establish an authentic dialogue with the work, and then let all these thoughts to enter, and then also maybe also to exit the work. And what's left is the artifact of painting, hopefully open to more interpretations. And yeah, and I'm very happy to read yours or to listen to yours, because it's very relevant and very something very close to what I was thinking as well.
Could I add one tiny footnote? So what I've said so far would work for one painting as well, yeah, of one paintings of sort of layered whales. And so for me, it was interesting that it was multiple. Yeah, it gives it in a kind of, I think it makes the statement, like I was wondering why it makes the statement stronger. Yeah, and it was a bit like it shows the inevitability of it. Yeah. Oh, I encounter it again. I encounter it like you found a relationship that is sort of like the as I said, sort of that it's not fixed for a particular topic. Is sort of expressed in sort of re-encountering in a way that it's an important topic, an important relationship that we are familiar with, shows itself that that each of them speak to you, and maybe you start thinking about different things. So there's certain, I think, repeating it shows it's something that is inescapable for us and sort of has a place in probably in painting, but also basically in as an experience of life more generally. So I was just wondering if you could say one more thing to why it had to be a sequence of related relationships you've been painting.
When I start to really kind of get into this conceptual idea of curtains or whales or fabrics, I saw them literally everywhere, like watching the windows, even from the flags, or seeing the reports, I don't know, of some governmental politics or European Union. There are always, I start to be aware, like I start to see absolutely everywhere, and curtain and fabric being a metaphor for almost everything. It's sort of insane. Even I was very aware of just tissue on the tissue on the table and everything. So start to see sort of structural possibilities of it. So, but facing the work in the studio, it's simply the visual part of it is also, it has to work not only temporarily for me in the studio, but so it has to work across time. I have to be able to come back and see if whether it needs some more layers or it's enough. And it's something between the visual side of it in the terms of transparency, it has to feel right in a way. No, in all ways, it has to feel right, basically. That would be the most true answer. But if you notice, like, they are not sometimes, I mean, they are not physically totally 100% right. They are not done from photography. So I just try to, again, achieve this edge of perception where simply it would make sense visually and metaphorically, and also sort of create these sort of possibilities for motion and absence. Yeah. So, and also the color was very important. Not kind of the color in. I'm talking more about now about the big work. It's about time. It gradually changes from more, let's say, like ultramarine blue to sort of silky violet or magenta, and this is also very important. And just color violet is such a special presence in nature for sure, and also in kind of linguistic meaning of it. So it holds a special position too. Yeah, and the one of the smaller ones for fragile whales, the darker one, actually, this is there's this probably in this one we can feel the biggest movement of the curtain towards the right. So it's for me it was really a joy to paint, and also a discovery at the same time. I didn't know how it would follow. I just tried to, but it struck me that this is what I want this particular one to do. This more sort of creating this sort of motion or something possibly which, if we perceive this as a stage or as a, stage is actually another metaphor for curtains and so on. But if we perceive it as a stage, we might think that we are late, something happened just even 30 seconds ago, and what we see is this aftermath of someone or something's happening. So all these notions are very relevant, and I think essentially I'm interested in painting as a medium unveiling in time. Yeah, I'm not. I don't feel that it's painting has to work across time, I guess, and actually to have a reason to look at it again and again and again, and finding probably different meanings. So, and I think that's paradoxical, but that's another important thing I need to, or it's another important thing which forces me go back to studio and look at it again and try to figure out something else. So yeah.
And again, questions are still, the floor is still open to anyone who has anything to ask. Yeah, John, go for it.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to ask you to maybe expand upon the importance of landscapes in your work and the interplay of landscapes with the mind, and them as a classic traditional painting, but completely differently done in your work.
Yeah, landscape is such a vast term of a whole range of experiences, and especially in contemporary terms, we have soundscape, we have dreamscape, we have so many scapes, cavescape, anything can be, because I think it's more like being aware of psychological space actually, and it's well, throughout. Now I'm thinking if we go very, very back to history, like to somebody like Peter Bruegel the Elder, they always compose or even Nicolas Poussin, or big names of European painting and the European landscape tradition. They always compose the landscape more or less to give us not only a physical appearance, but also a mood, an atmosphere. And I'm sure I don't have to say too much about like Turner in British tradition. It's so where I'm pointing to is that throughout the ages, throughout the centuries, term landscape gathered so many layers and so many meanings, from subjective to very observational. And even if we expand to, for example, outside of Western art to, for example, Chinese ancient inkscapes, and Japanese calligraphy as well as Chinese calligraphy, that's another broad range of how we can see the landscape, not only as a physical representation or gathering the forms of a place or of a physically out of trees and just being composed. It's this constant search constant search for essence of one's own relationship to the world in general. And as well all the landscapes are social constructs as well. There is, even if we think in terms of something like original landscape, there is probably no such thing in a way. Definitely there is nature, which is another big category. But I think is again, like, trying to come back to our times, definitely across 20th century, this term in visual arts got so much meaning, so much. It's fascinating for me as well, and it's something almost impossible to just label and put in the box. Even I'm very aware that most of people who will look at my work will label it as a landscape, but it's in the process of creation, it's much more than that. I mean, this flux of weather, this flux of simply evolving in time, it's another aspect of landscape, which is like constant change, constantly changing, not being a one static thing, one static view. It's about the relationship of one to its physical being. And also another thing is that landscape is not something out there, it's something we carry along, as for example, of course, everybody would very clearly remember their own childhood or some landscape features, which wherever they go, it's something which is written in them. So I think in a sense, it's not about the gaze only focusing outward. It's the constant dialogue of shifting energies, actually.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've got such a great way of relating with the world through your works as well.
Thank you very much.
I am conscious of the time, but I will ask if there's sort of any other questions. Of course, we don't want to keep you too long, but if there's time, and if you're all right too, we can certainly take one more question from the floor.
Can I ask a question?
By all means, go for it.
Oh, hi, yeah, I'm really enjoying your work being in the gallery. Thanks for tonight. I really wanted to just focus on, I suppose, just a question about the psychological state of when you're painting. And Josh referred to some of them as a sort of stream of consciousness. Yet they're clearly very well thought through, and much of that thinking through is done on the canvas. So can you expand on your process of thinking with paint and sort of how conscious a process it is?
I think this is something which will always fascinate me. Like it's like this it has to be control, otherwise nothing gets done. But as well, it can't be. It has to be intuitive, and this to balance these aspects among many others. It's something which is definitely for me the biggest reason for painting to exist even in our times. Like why don't to like physically engage in the material and think through the material it's something which has to be done in front of canvas. You can't simply premeditate too much. I mean, it has to be finally resolved there. So the best. So the question is about thinking through the materials, right? That's difficult. That's quite difficult. Quite a challenge to put into words. It's a lot with trial and error as well. Just trying the ideas and yeah, I'm not sure what to say, actually.
It's quite personal, isn't it?
It's
quite a personal question, I guess, at a certain level as well.
Thinking through material, I think, yeah, it's simply, yeah, it's happening once something happens when we touch on the canvas, like all the possibilities start to be focused on what's happening in the presence. Suddenly, it's not the vast amount of possibilities. It's this one here and all the values of it. So, for example, brush stroke starting. It's not only color, tone, or it's motion. It's the direction. It's force applied to it. It might be different strokes. It's the fluency of more or less calligraphical part of it. You know, it's. And also at the same time, like being aware that at any given point, it might be just full mark. It doesn't need to be part of, for example, a tree or something to be later shaped into something else. Sort of, I'm very interested in this relationship, in this almost ontological relationship of mark, the brushwork, and actually the movement in itself. So, yeah. And as I pointed slightly before, as I pointed to thinking in terms of outside of Western art, for example, or Western philosophy, kind of in a ancient Chinese paintings where they perceived as a landscape as a recollection of their experiences in nature. So they didn't have a plenar sketch. They always try to absorb the landscape and then recreate it back in the studio and keeping vividly this space of recollection and abstraction of the marks. Actually, they were very important to. They didn't have to portray something, but just being a vehicle for this flowing emptiness. The concept of emptiness in East Asian philosophy is something very important. So I guess I find for myself both of these worlds. Of course, European tradition or Western tradition is very important, and this is something which is so close to me. But at the same time, these slightly different principles and also very ancient principles of perception in East Asian philosophy is something great, and I find so many great possibilities for articulation between or actually in parallel of these two mindsets, actually, in painting, for example.
Thank you.
Right, so with that, what I will say is that I'd like to thank everyone here in attendance, and a special thank you, of course, to Jan Valik, who not only, thank you for spending this time with us to discuss in a great amount of detail your process and your thought as your thoughts as you're producing work and all the lead up to that, but as well indeed for participating in the exhibition and for being wonderfully accommodating throughout. So yeah, thank you very much from
It's
all
my
of us.
pleasure. Thank you very much for having
Thank you.
me. And yeah, I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. And just one last thing, it's before we finish. I'd like to also just draw mention to our last art class. They'll be taking place this Wednesday, the 23rd, from 1 to 3 p.m. outside Art Exchange. And it will be a class guided by Claudia to encourage you basically to get in touch with the subconscious through painting. So it's very much so leaning into the dreadfully automatic art and sort of the idea of just painting straight from subconscious. But yes, with that, thank you all, and yes, we'll hope that we'll hope to see you at Art Exchange, again in future. And yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Cheers.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.